Hello and welcome everyone to episode 10 of the Blah Blah USA Politics Now podcast. And surprise, I am speaking in English. I know I'm probably one of the only people that would say it's weird to speak in English about American politics, but here we are. And today we have a special guest with us, Andre from Florida, from the USA. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be here. Happy to be back on politics now.
Thank you very much. And also another special guest. I do this podcast with Politics Now, but we haven't seen Stanislav here yet. So Stanislav, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we got the pleasantries out the way, and now let's get to the real deal. So Andre, I saw your YouTube channel. It's very interesting. You go through a lot of historical events. I saw as well. You go back in time, and when I think of U.S. politics, looking back over the years, I don't think about the specific things that presidents did on a day-to-day. It would be more like I think of it in longer periods of narratives. For example, you could say that Donald Trump won was a bit chaotic at the beginning, then some COVID took over, right? COVID took over. That was the big narrative of Donald Trump's second half of his first term. Then it morphed into Joe Biden's first half of his first term. And then I find that the rest of his presidency was sort of overshadowed by his age and his mental faculties sort of declining. Then we saw Donald's second term, which is where we are now. I mean, we're all only 6 months in, or just a little bit over 6 months in, and I was thinking, I mean, what is this sort of overall narrative that we're going to be talking about in a couple of years now from this first half, or the first half of the first half of Donald Trump's presidency? Is that something that does anything come to mind to you, or is it sort of still not clear? What do you think?
No, I mean, I think that's fascinating because I tend to think of it as from 2015 until now. I think of as an overarching Trump era, right? Like
Hmm.
even when Biden took over, I think that Trump was still the single most definitive figure in American politics. Everything was based upon your reaction to him, right? He's the
Hmm.
central point of conversation. So I tend to think of it as one big era. So it's interesting that you're looking at each presidency respectively as their own eras. I would say though that so far in the first 8 months or so of Trump 2, I think that the number one thing that defines it is just a complete redefinition of what we thought American politics could be. And it's so strange because we're a decade into having Trump as a political figure, and it feels like just now the boundaries are being pushed so much more. You see the the presidency and the executive branch just doing a lot of things that you would have never expected it to do. It's challenging court orders, it's cracking down on free speech in a lot of matters. Trump is practicing foreign policy in a way that you wouldn't generally expect from even his first administration, right? I think if you look at Trump 1, he was still, there was a lot of guardrails around him from the Republican establishment. I don't think he expected to become president. And once he got in, it was very chaotic, like you said, and he wasn't really sure what to do with it. There was a lot of hiring and firing people. I think actually that this second Trump administration is a lot more effective in accomplishing Trump's goals than his second administration would have been if he had gotten reelected in 2020, because he got those 4 years to go away from the presidency and basically just be a shadow president for a couple of years, criticizing Biden, building up an infrastructure, taking over the Republican establishment, so to speak. And now Trump is the party, right? He gets to decide what's MAGA and what's not. And I think that in a landscape like that, where the politics is so defined by one person's complete ideology, it's just really fascinating because right now, you know, with what comes next, we don't know what that's going to look like once Trump isn't exactly at the head of the party anymore, right? If he doesn't choose to run again, which legally he can't, but he really is positioning himself to. So it's just a question of right now I think it's just pushing boundaries, and I think we're getting the bull in the china shop that some people talked about back in 2016. I think now is truly when you're seeing Trump kind of run rampant in the way that he always wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree that if he was elected now in 2024, and that is making him more effective than if he was going to have a second term starting 2020. What do you think, Stan? Do you agree with what Andre said, or do you have a sort of a different perspective?
Yeah, I think this is something I also wanted to mention, that perhaps viewing American politics in terms of terms, different presidents is not necessarily, maybe since Trump or maybe since much longer ago, it's not the best model, because many of the actions taken by Trump, but also actions that were taken kind of around Trump when he was initially elected, they had the repercussions much later, right? And it's not even in the re-election of Donald Trump. It's, I think, in the shifting of the political landscape. So I'm guessing we are going to talk about, possibly like political violence and so on. And I think that does have its roots in somewhere around that time. Of course, it has much deeper roots in American politics, but I don't think we can pinpoint, one moment of like, okay, 2024, Trump wins, and that's when there is this massive radicalization suddenly. I think that might have something to do with Trump, but it might have something to do with 2016, 2017 Trump. So I would absolutely agree that there are some long-term effects. So in terms of what the present day Trump administration is doing, and the effects of what it's doing, what these effects will be, I think that's nearly impossible to fully describe, because that's going to kind of echo throughout the years, and sometimes it's not the things that you expect the most, right? Sometimes the certain events of the first Trump administration, which we might have thought were extremely crucial, from some perspective they are, from another perspective they aren't. It seemed during the first Trump campaign that there were a lot of pitfalls and a lot of things that he would have to struggle with throughout his presidency, and now they're all gone, right? Something like QAnon seems like that, which was a major driving force behind the insanity of the first Trump, and I would say even the Trump in the middle, when he wasn't president but was the shadow president, as you mentioned. I think that now seems inconsequential, but who knows if in a couple of years, some certain events of the second Trump term will prove crucial. I think I would, if I were to place my money on something, I would say it's, generally speaking, this lack of regard for the rule of law, let's say, or for how things were usually done. The executive branch is definitely taken over. It's being not just executive, like everything seems to be consolidated under Trump, under his we can even think back to Doge and how much of a kind of, it seems historically absurd overtake of government that was, in a way, right? But now it seems like that's already passed. So it's difficult to say, but I would say that, yeah, this is definitely the president consolidating more power. At least that. I think that's like the basic thing that maybe we could agree on.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, obviously, with the news cycle being 24 hours long and news basically changing every day to sort of pinpoint specific themes. But what I was thinking, as you guys were saying, is that, first of all, we're not going to go into Pizzagate and QAnon, okay? Don't worry, guys, on this podcast. So whoever's listening doesn't need to worry about that. But going into, I mean, I was thinking maybe could we be looking back on this first or on this second Trump term and just think that what defined it is just its sort of incredible or just the sort of efficiency with which they are achieving some of their goals in that regard? Obviously, you know, you think about it going after, let's say, you know, NPR, you know, the you know, removing financing from universities, going after different law firms. You know, those are things that maybe Donald Trump wanted to do in his first term, but in his second term, it seems like, you know, all these big tech firms, all these universities, all these law firms are actually mostly lying down to his demands and you know, ceding ground in this sort of war that has been going on. And I'm just thinking that could it be that it's just this efficiency and ruthlessness that Donald Trump going after his political opponents, could that be the defining factor of his second term? I mean, Andre, what do you think about that?
Well, I think as you're saying that, I think about Trump just in context, right? I think that Donald Trump is the single most redefining figure of our politics since Ronald Reagan. I think that he has completely changed the environment and the landscape. I don't think that, like, Barack Obama, George Bush, Clinton, even Bush 1, I don't think any of those people shifted our politics as much as Donald Trump has. You know, and especially now when you're talking about the complete takeover of the executive branch, right? Like being able to just change policy wherever you want, going after your political opponents. I think that the precedent that Trump is setting there is going to be a really interesting one because I've seen some conservatives concerned about this as well. I believe Ted Cruz was just talking about the what the FCC was doing with Jimmy Kimmel, and he was
Mhm.
like, "Hey, when Democrats take back over again, they're going to have that same power. They're going to be at the head of the Federal Trade Commission, and they're going to be able to actually determine what people get to say, right? The next Democratic president, if anything, I think that Trump's biggest sort of change to politics might just be the centralizing more power in the executive, because rarely ever when presidents become more powerful do they give that back, right? Like you could look back in American history at moments where power expanded, whether that be Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt. All those presidents gradually became more and more powerful. The presidency was actually originally a very far removed office that didn't have that much impact on the citizens' day-to-day lives. And then around the time of FDR, you get the start of the modern imperial presidency, where the president is like this leader of the free world. Now you really have a remarkable thing where since our politics right now is so surrounded or so engulfed by the cult of personality that is Donald Trump, you have Congress ceding power to the executive, which is something that would have been unthinkable, right? Like you get that a little bit with George Bush and the Patriot Act. Like to this day, we still have the executive branch bombing countries under the authorization for military force that happened following 9/11, and you just see Congress kind of giving that up. And whether it's a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress, that's still going to have an effect. Right now, we have the president defining more policy than he probably has at any time in American history. And I think that that we're worse off for that. I think that the country prospers at a moment where the Congress is a bit more powerful. If anything, I feel like the presidency is too powerful for its own good. I think that you actually get overwhelmed when everything feels like a crisis and everything's under your umbrella. It makes it a little harder to get all the stuff done that you actually want to do. For all that Trump wants to do, right? Like we're talking about how he's doing these things, but they're executive actions. They're things that can be turned around once the next president comes in that doesn't agree with him, right? They're not actually lasting change. I believe that because like the Republicans have a majority in Congress right now, they could get through more meaningful legislation if they wanted to, but they're just not focused on that. They are focused on executive action. Other than the big beautiful bill, there's no like significant piece of legislation there. So I think that for all that we're talking about Trump's effectiveness, which yes, he has sort of like brought the country to a standstill right now, and he has like Zuckerberg and Bezos and all these people kind of kowtowing to him. I think that it's this sort of style of politics that isn't really going to it's not going to fundamentally change the material conditions. All it does is really change what's socially acceptable in this country, what we expect from our president, and I think that's something that could really come back to bite them in the future.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I also just want to
can I-
add to that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, go for it.
No, I just had a small follow-up question, I guess, because it is something I've also noticed, and basically, being interested in kind of the legality of all of it. I was wondering if you think that this is something that Trump does, having a decreeing essentially that now there are, I don't know, two genders or something like that, right? Which seems kind of an absurd legal move to make. You just sign a document and that's it. It's like kind of attempting to be, royal in a way, like in a very old school way. Do you think that this is because of his like lack of knowledge of the procedures, and the fact that it would maybe, if he genuinely wanted to enact something like that, it might be more effective to actually do it for Congress? Or do you think that the reason he can do it is that there is like remarkably little pushback from the other side? That nobody is. It seems like with the Patriot Act that you mentioned, to some extent, both sides of the aisle were kind of hostage to the idea that they have to defend the country. Now we don't have that. The Democrats are clearly, well, at least in terms of what their position politically is, they are against Trump. They don't have to pretend that they're in favor of recognizing only two genders or anything. So yeah, the two questions are: is this because Trump just doesn't care and likes signing things with his big signature, and is it, to what extent is it also because Democrats are not pushing back on actions like this, on just executivizing everything?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. Actually, I'm really glad that you asked that. I think that part of it is Trump's personality, right? I think part of it is that he sort of likes to think of himself as like this king, this kind of all-powerful executive, and all things can be done through him. I think that part of it is that for all that we're talking about his effectiveness, he is a Washington outsider. And I think this is unpopular to say, but it's a belief that I really hold. I don't think Washington outsiders make particularly good presidents, right? Like, I think that having experience in the Congress and actually knowing how to work within the system is very, very useful. I think if we look at our history of like the last 7 or so presidents, you got Donald Trump, you have other than Joe Biden, you have Donald Trump, Barack Obama, who was in the Senate for 2.5 years before he started running for president. You got George Bush, who was a Texas governor. He had never actually served in Congress in Washington. Same with Bill Clinton, Arkansas governor, small state, hadn't worked in Washington. Before that, it's George H.W. Bush, who actually was a Washington insider. And I have a video all about drawing the parallels between H.W. Bush and Biden. And Biden, say all the things you want about him, he actually was able to get some domestic legislation done that was much more impressive than a lot of the stuff that Obama or Clinton were able to do, right? Like, you got Build Back Better, you got the CHIPS Act, you got these like genuine like big accomplishments because Biden did have that experience. So I think that part of it is that Trump doesn't really know how to work that well within Congress. Part of it is that he does like being the executive who can just sort of decree things. Part of it is that their Republican majority isn't that big, and you genuinely do have some people defecting, like Thomas Massey wasn't in favor of the big beautiful bill, for example, right? Like, you do have this kind of fragile coalition, and I think that you're going to see something happen, especially after next year's midterms, where the Democrats are likely to take back the House. I think the Trump presidency is basically going to be over, right? Like, you're going to have nonstop subpoenas and investigations and all these things. Like, you think that RFK Jr. and Kash Patel and these people are getting grilled by Congress now. When Democrats are in charge of like oversight in Congress, I think that it's going to be a lot tougher on them. You're going to have a lot more lawsuits and sort of halts to the executive actions that they're taking now. So I think that part of it is just that they're limited in their scope. I think that Democrats, like talking about how Democrats aren't pushing back that well, I think they were sort of shocked by this last election because 2016, a lot of people, especially Democrats, saw as a fluke, right? Like, oh, this guy didn't win the popular vote. Some people voted for him and they didn't really know what they were doing. This isn't really who we are. Then in 2020, Joe Biden takes back the country, right? Supposedly, he's supposed to be the return to normalcy president. And then things don't go back to normal. Things actually feel worse for a lot of people because we're getting the effects of COVID, inflation's coming around, things that I think would have happened regardless of if Trump or Biden was in the White House, right? But if you're the president, you're the one that gets blamed for it. But I think that 2024 was actually, you know, with Donald Trump winning, not just winning back the White House, but winning the popular vote. And what I'd say is probably the greatest political comeback in American history, regardless of how you feel about Trump. It's a remarkable feat, right? I think that it just left them sort of stunned. And I think that leaders like Jeffries and Schumer, who a lot of people have been unhappy with on the left side of the aisle, sort of put their hands up and they were like, okay, you know, this is what people voted for. They're going to mess up the country for a little bit and then we can run on taking it down in the midterms. But then you see like for example, the government shutdown that was coming up a couple months ago. Schumer just went along with Trump and helped him not shut down the government, kept the government funded. Now that conversation's coming back again. But you do see Democrats sort of pushing back, like whether that be Bernie Sanders and AOC or someone like James Tallarico and what the Texas state senators were doing about the gerrymandering and redistricting. There are people that are trying. I think it's just that without the majority in Congress, there's not that much like objectively that they can do. But even then, leadership hasn't exactly taken the opportunities that they've been given. But as far as, so I think Trump's doing sort of what fits his personality, what he can within his own coalition, and what his scope of power allows him to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, you know, you were saying that Donald Trump obviously is centralizing power in the executive, but also he's doing things, I think, on shaky legal grounds in itself. I mean, using emergency powers to enact tariffs, for example, or getting rid of Lisa Cook in the Fed, right? Again, another shaky legal decision that might be held up in the Supreme Court, but you cannot be 100% sure. Obviously, it helps that it's 6-3 and the Republicans have a big majority. But so you guys mentioned the 2026 parliamentary elections, and you know, you seem pretty confident that the Democrats will take back the House. And so I mean, I just want to then make you force you to double down. So you're 100% confident that, and this one I can start with Stan, because Andre's probably got a sore throat from all the questions. But so Stan, so you're pretty confident that the Democrats will take back the House, even with the gerrymandering decisions in a bunch of different states, even with this sort of renewed enthusiasm on the Republican side, especially now after the murder, obviously, of Charlie Kirk. Do you like we're confident? We are confident here that the Democrats will take back the House.
Well, I'm not. This is what Andre said, but I'm not so confident. I think it's not impossible because it seems definitely like a natural order of things that, you know, once you get elected, people get tired of you, and it's that simple. But and I wouldn't right now, although I would say there are genuine concerns when it comes to the state of democracy in the US, I wouldn't say like that it's impossible in some way for Democrats to win. I do think, however, that the Trump enthusiasm, it seems to me, still isn't over. Of course, I don't have like the boots on the ground as Andre does, but from what I can see in the media, what I can see in the also the social media landscape, which I think this is also something I would highlight as maybe the defining feature of this presidency or this political period, that it's very internetified, I would say, very memeified to an extent that I don't think we've seen before. Even back in 2016, even though Trump was, he rode the wave of like outright polarization or outright being kind of becoming more and more present. I think nowadays we literally, have, as we've mentioned and we keep mentioning, we have Charlie Kirk, an internet personality, killed by someone who seems to be engaging to some extent with something you can find online. And Elon Musk, who is an owner of a social media company, also being very heavily involved in the government and all of that. So I think that would be a defining feature of one of the defining features of this political period. But coming back to the question about Democrats winning, I think there is still the Trump enthusiasm isn't over. I think the culture war is to some extent getting worse. And I think to the disadvantage of the Democrats, the Democratic base, as far as I can hear, is very disappointed because as much as you can count on scoring political points by collaborating with this government, there is going to be a whole, a whole group of people of your base, not just the extremely left-wing voters, who are going to be very dissatisfied with the fact that you do nothing to push against a person who you're calling a fascist, for example, right? Democrats, on some instances, called Trump a fascist, said that he's abusing his power, and then they just go along with what he does, and I would say, and this is, I think, more of an opinion, but they don't do enough to meaningfully distinguish themselves from Republicans on many issues. But I think this is a progressive take that what I just said. But I think, basically speaking, like, the Democratic voters, Democrats are not satisfied with what Democrats are doing. Bernie Sanders is, signed himself out of that. So the best, the brightest characters on that side of the aisle are not even, sometimes not even in the Democratic Party. So I think, yeah, it's messy, and to some extent, I don't understand why there isn't this central effort to push back against the narrative from the other side. And maybe this is something that Andre could also answer, because I'm surprised, frankly, why it seemed like a few weeks, like the day after the election, the Democrats were kind of silent, and they said, well, we have to figure this out. And it seems like now it's, however long, it's almost a year after the election, and they're still kind of trying to figure out what happened, how to respond. And in that, they lost a bunch of time through these couple of months, I think.
Yeah, I just before we go to Andre, I think I want to point a question your way. So, I mean, I think, my opinion, it looks like Schumer is going to give in again in this shutdown. From the way I'm watching it play out again, and it might be like a 4 or 5 day shutdown, then give back into demands, or Schumer won't be able to control the Democratic senators, and you'll have more, the more moderate wing voting to keep the government open. However, so we've established that the Democrats in power right now are disappointing, let's say, the base. So would it be the job of the 2028ers, the candidates in 28, to lead the Democrats to victory in 2026?
Sorry, was that to me, or was that to Stanisław?
So yeah, so that was to you, basically. I mean, if the electorate, if the Democratic electorate is disappointed with its congressional representatives, is it not the job of the 2028ers to sort of carry that flag, push a message, and sort of push Democrats over the line in these parliamentary elections?
Yeah, okay, I'll respond to that, and I also want to respond to a lot of what Stanislav said, because I think even though sort of fundamental take on it is different. I think we do agree on a majority, or at least I agree with the majority of what you said just then. I think that really looking at it, right? I think that if you look at thermostatic public opinion, right? When was the last time that we changed presidencies without changing parties, right? It was 1988 with George H.W. Bush, not within any of our lifetimes. You know, I think that once you get a Democrat in office, people are more likely to vote for a Republican. You're more likely to just vote against whatever you just had. And that goes for the midterms too. I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but I think that after every single general election, generally in the next midterm, the president's party takes a really huge hit. I think that Joe Biden in 2022 actually overperformed more than any party in power since Franklin Roosevelt, I believe. Like you could look at Trump in 2018, you can look at Obama in 2014, right? Like they really suffer in the midterms. And to what Stanislav was saying, I think it's less so about Democrats winning the midterms than it is about Republicans losing them, right? Like I think Democrats can be really unpopular, but still be the other option, still be not Republicans. And I think you're going to have a really energized base that even if they're not super excited to vote for the Democratic Party ticket, they're going to be excited to vote against whatever Republicans are, right? Just in terms of harm reduction. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't up to Democrats to energize the base and try to get as big of gains as possible. But if you look at the party leaders right now, like the people who are really getting attention, they're not Schumer and Jeffries. I don't think the average American knows who Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are, right? Like the Democratic Party doesn't have a leader at the moment, but I think if you ask the average person, the people that they're seeing like take action are what, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Zoran is absolutely huge. Like I had non-political friends asking me about like what was going on in New York City and looking at that. And I, as someone who's generally more progressive, I wish I could say that it was people coming around to more progressive policies, but a lot of times it's just a matter of the people that are fighting, right? I think you saw when Newsom had a bit of a moment there when he was kind of trolling Trump and talking about the gerrymandering and all these things, like James Tallarico, another candidate who's a good bit more moderate, but who's drawing attention from people because he seems genuine. He seems like someone who's fighting. So I'd say that Democrats still have some time to get themselves together. I think obviously nothing's 100% certain, but I think like I'm fairly comfortable saying the Democrats will win back next year. But I think that that's kind of something that would happen generally. I think they'll take back the House. The Senate's a lot harder of a map for them, even with the gerrymandering. The House, I think, is pretty safe bet, just because of thermostatic public opinion. But like you were saying, Nikki, I think you have the people that are trying to position themselves as the leaders of the party, whether that be someone like you got some unexpected ones. You got Chris Van Hollen from Maryland talking to Kamar Abrego Garcia, kind of trying to position himself to run for president. You have AOC. I think there was just a story yesterday in Axios about how she's positioning for 2028. You got Gavin Newsom, obviously, J.B. Pritzker, these different figures kind of fighting for what leadership of the party looks like. But generally right now, I'd say people aren't really thinking about who's going to be the next Democratic nominee unless they're kind of like freaks like us, who look at these things every day. I think they're just looking at what's going viral, who's kind of talking against Trump, and that's not generally the people right now that you associate with the typical Democratic Party, I'd say.
Yeah, well, you mentioned obviously Mamdani there. I must say, I'm so impressed with his just political campaign. To be honest, on some of the issues, I obviously wouldn't see eye to eye with him. But the way he's been blowing Cuomo out of the water, at least in my opinion, when it comes to sort of branding and interesting campaign ideas. I mean, the treasure hunt or whatever he did in New York City was incredible. Honestly, I had to retweet it because I was just so impressed with the way a campaign is run, and then his videos are funny and informative, etc. So I wanted to say that. However, when we were talking about the leaders of the Democratic Party, there's one that's been in the news recently that we haven't yet mentioned, and that is obviously Kamala Harris, whose new book is coming out very, very soon. And some very interesting excerpts are being, released, I think, through The Atlantic, and then there was one more recently through I can't remember where, but she seems to be throwing a lot of people under the bus, and a lot of us political pundits here, or these who aspire to be political pundits, don't really understand why she's doing that or what she's doing that. The only thing that I can see a reason for what she's doing is that maybe she wants to just sell as many books, as many copies as she possibly can. But so she's being extra spicy, extra controversial. Andre, do you want to say a couple of words as to what you think about the recent excerpts of Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a bit too little too late, in my opinion. I think that Kamala Harris had a genuine opportunity to distance herself a little bit from Biden during the campaign in a way that she didn't, right? And I understand that she was in a difficult position. I understand that, like, you're someone's vice president, you want to be loyal to them. There's pressure coming in from him for her not to say things about him. I believe we've known for a while now that right before the first debate, he told her, "No daylight, kid," right? Like, don't separate yourself from me at all. But I also think that Kamala Harris was someone who wanted to be leader of the free world, so you have to expect a little bit more from her, right? You want her to be able to kind of push back against this sort of political figure who's strong-arming her. I think Kamala just hasn't always had the best political instincts, right? I think she wouldn't have been my choice for VP in 2020. She wouldn't have been my choice for nominee in 2024. I think she did some really interesting stuff there at the beginning. I think there was genuinely like some energy behind her, but as the campaign went along and she was just like campaigning with Liz Cheney, and the sort of energy just didn't feel like it was there anymore. I think there's some things in there that are genuinely what she felt, like when she was kind of complaining about Tim Walz, right, being disappointed in his debate performance. I thought that was very revealing, because I did think he's someone who was underutilized, especially in the back half of the campaign. They were not using him nearly as much as they should have. But I think part of it is trying to distance herself from Biden in a way that she wasn't able to do last cycle. Now that Biden's kind of, like his political career is dead in the water, there's no consequence anymore for that. I really don't. I think she's going to run for president in 2028. I don't think it's the best idea. If I were her, I'd probably have run for governor in the next cycle. I think that's probably better suited for her. I think that the fact that she said she's not running for governor does mean she's running for president. And this book, I don't know, it's just kind of putting some dirt out there, kind of talking trash about your political contemporaries, and not really taking responsibility, I guess. I think I saw the first page of the book is like, oh, there was some quote like, "It is so much harder to disprove bullshit than it is to spew it," or something like that. And it's like, dude, come on. And there's like a Kendrick Lamar quote on the first page. I'm like, I adore Kendrick Lamar. I got 2 Kendrick Lamar vinyls on my wall right now. But like, dude, like that, it really just is not a really good look for you.
That is very funny. I mean, she threw obviously, well, Pete Buttigieg a little bit there. I mean, under the bus. I was thinking, this is for Stan now, but she said obviously America wouldn't be ready for a gay VP and a black woman as president. And I'm just like thinking, if you're supposed to be, the strong leader, as you want to become the leader of the United States, you're supposed to be a strong leader. I mean, if you want to pick Pete Buttigieg as your VP, you should do what you feel is right and pick him, and just all these things, I mean, are so perplexing. I cannot understand Kamala Harris at all. Stan, I don't know what you feel about her.
Yeah, I think that there is what you mentioned just goes to show how difficult it is to navigate the changing, I would say, methods of how politics is being done, at least in the US, from what I can see, which is that some time ago, something like a black woman running for president would have been seen as to some extent an advantage, then a disadvantage, because people suddenly you get the advice that people are tired of the culture wars and tired of that basically Kamala Harris throughout her campaign was really playing down any kind of diversity aspect of her as a person, of that being the first woman president. Like when we compare it to Hillary Clinton, who like made her whole thing to some extent. But then again, like if I were to point to that and saying, well, maybe you should just be, kind of embrace who you are in a way that is doable. Like when we look at Mamdani, right? Like that, he kind of did that by saying, yes, I'm Muslim, I'm a socialist, and like, but let's deal with what actually matters. I think that's, you can give that advice that that's doable, but then for some it will not be doable. And I think in terms of the presidential elections and who the Democrats pick, because I think that's the most interesting question here, it's really going to depend on who the Republicans pick, because running against Trump was unlike, that was unlike running probably against anybody. That was so running against Trump was really a strange thing that a Democratic candidate that Kamala Harris had to also navigate, because on one hand he has so many clear disadvantages to him and so many scandals surrounding him and kind of criminal behavior, but on the other hand it doesn't seem to hurt him to an extent that maybe a Democratic candidate would assume that it would. So I think in terms of Kamala Harris now writing a book and kind of distancing herself from at least how she has been perceived, which is too close to Joe Biden, too close to not different enough maybe. I think I would say it's too little too late, but I would understand this. I would read this as her attempt to show herself now that she can, now that she's not bound by Joe Biden, show herself as like a genuine, strong political figure who can take on a Republican candidate because she has her own vision. So yeah, and I don't think it will work. And it doesn't, doesn't reflect any like my approach towards Kamala Harris. I think she's fine, but I don't think the Democrats will want to risk it. I don't think that something like that has ever happened, except for Trump, right? That your candidate loses and you pick him again. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see, but I don't think Kamala Harris will win the presidential election, which might be a shock.
I mean, for Republican nominee, it's 99.999% going to be Vance, right, Andre?
Oh man, I think it'll probably be, if I'm guessing, I think it'll probably be a contest between Vance and Rubio for the most part. You might get some of the people like DeSantis, though I think DeSantis really shot the bed by trying to primary Trump. I don't think that was a good idea for him, and he's going to be out of office starting next year. So I think DeSantis should have had Pete Hegseth's job. I know he was positioning himself for Secretary of Defense, and if Hegseth hadn't gotten confirmed, he likely would have been Secretary of Defense. I think that if he hadn't run against Trump, it would have probably been him in that slot, and he would be better positioned to run for president next cycle. But I think it's probably going to be mostly between Vance and Rubio, unless there's some like moderate Republicans that are trying to get in there. Vance is someone who's a little dangerous, I'd say, for the Democrats, just because he's such a political chameleon. Like he can get on a podcast and kind of shoot the shit with some like alt-right kind of bros, and joke and be super online. But he can debate Tim Walz and make himself seem like very good and measured and articulate. I think that he actually would be able to do a lot of the stuff that Trump does more effectively, because he does have a little bit more of that mask. And I think that, well, Vance is also interesting because he does sort of like, he supported Lena Khan as chair of the FTC, right? Like he had some sort of like populist inclinations there that I don't think Trump exactly has, that make him a bit more interesting of a candidate. But I also do think he'd be more effective in like social policies that I personally don't really agree with. I think that as far as campaigning, who's like the perfect person to run against Vance? You know, as much as I don't like Gavin Newsom, I do think that there's kind of like, and this is parallels that I've seen recently of like the Chad Gavin Newsom with like this picture perfect family versus like the loser JD Vance. Like, did you guys see there was like Nazis on Twitter? They were posting Gavin Newsom and his like white family looking like handsome and stuff next to like JD Vance and his Indian kids. Sort of like drawing a comparison there. I do think there's like weird sort of like horseshoe theory there, where these like people that are just weird and racist might not like JD because he does have brown children, which is very JD in general just has a lot of like strange idiosyncrasies in his own worldview when it comes to
But
like
would that not mean, I mean, you're saying he's a chameleon and he can do this and that. I mean, in my opinion, if you were saying that's something about a Democrat where he can present himself well on a podcast and then go debate well and then go do a show, I mean, that's the definition of a good politician, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that Vance is so comparable to Richard Nixon, right? And Richard Nixon is a
Okay.
politician that I have a hard time seeing working in a modern context. So that it's like an advantage for Vance and it's a disadvantage at the same time. JD Vance seems like such an online figure that it's strange for me to think that like everyone in the country knows who he is, when he seems like this kind of niche poster in a certain way. My favorite clip of him actually is have you guys ever seen him on Theo Von? And there's like a tweet on screen and he's like, oh, you blocked the person who tweeted that, and they show it and it was Ian Miles Chong on Twitter. And JD just starts like, he bursts out laughing and I'm like, of course he knows who Ian Miles Chong is, right? Like he's just this kind of niche figure in a way that I think might kind of hurt him a little bit, but I don't know, he is a chameleon in a way. I'd be curious what you guys think of his political prospects.
I mean, I'll just really quickly before we let Stan speak. I think, in my opinion, I think he's like I agree with you, a good politician in that he can do all these things. Again, a lot of views, I wouldn't agree with him. I'm in Poland, I'm in Krakow, I'm pretty close to the Ukrainian border. It'd be pretty, as some of the things that he says are a tiny bit concerning. However, just from a political sort of analyst sort of aerial view over here, I wanna just say that I do think he's a good politician, and I think I can't really see in my head Rubio sort of challenging him for the spot. I don't see how their debates would look like. It would be incredibly cordial and they would disagree on some points slightly because they're friends as well. Politics obviously is cutthroat, but it's difficult for me to see Rubio sort of challenging Vance for that, knowing that Rubio's chances would be so small to win, looking at the polls and stuff, even though that maybe Rubio would be my preferred candidate if I were to pick out of the two. But yeah, I think JD Vance is a good politician, and I do think, thinking about Democrats that could take him on, Gavin Newsom, yeah, I agree, the Gavin Newsom could take him on, but they're going to have to put up someone good to contend with him. So, San, you were saying that you were thinking it depends who the Republicans will pick. So now let's assume the Republican candidate is JD Vance. So now who would you think then is the right candidate for the Democrats?
Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to also follow up what Andre said with, because I think in this context, when we mentioned Gavin Newsom and compared him to JD Vance and kind of discussed this political chameleon, let's say, nature of both of these possible candidates, I think that the playing field is again uneven here because I think that a Democrat again, I'm more pessimistic maybe than you two, or maybe than you, Andre, about the prospects of Democrats. So I think a Democratic candidate has to really highlight in what they are actually bringing to the table, because from my perspective, and this is like a very, I would say, strong thesis, and I don't know if I am able to fully defend it, but my intuition is that what Trump's presidency, his second term, the way it might have an appeal to people is that it's still, we know that Trump is very focused on constantly doing things and constantly signing things and constantly engaging with people, threatening them, or just being present in the media, in the flow of information, the media, in the news cycle. And I think what a Democrat has to do, a Democratic candidate has to do, is essentially they have to cut through all of that, all of the, what Vance could possibly say, which is, I want to continue the work of this administration, which, whether you agree with this administration or not, it is radically pushing things in a direction, in a certain direction, right? It is doing something. So JD Vance can come out and say, well, I want to keep doing that. What the current administration so far, we are a few months into this administration, what it is doing is so still puzzling that maybe after 4 years, people still don't know like what they think fully. So what a Democrat has to do is offer their own version of this, right? And that's extremely difficult to compete with. And I don't know, of course, we are not very close to the elections, so the candidates haven't started, ramping up their ideas, presenting their ideas, or ramping up the rhetoric. But I don't see anything about Gavin Newsom, which is, which would someone like Zoran Mamdani, I think, would be paradoxically, even though he's definitely more far left, would be a better candidate. He cannot run, of course, but would be a better candidate, just because he matches the strength of the strong flavor of the current administration. And I think of JD Vance, who I don't think is a strong political character, but he kind of found himself in this position now where he possibly will take the mantle of Trumpism. So I don't know. I think someone like AOC, in my eyes, would be a better candidate. But then again, there is also something about AOC which I don't know. It seems to me like she has such a strong or such a peculiar base, I would say, like people who support her. She is kind of niche in terms of like people know who she is, but her like genuine staunch supporters, they are easy to disappoint because they are, leftists, and leftists are easy to disappoint, which I say as a leftist. But and I don't know whether she has the power to like bring the country to. I haven't seen, as much as I've seen her in different roles in how she does politics, I haven't seen her in a role of bringing people together and being very presidential. And I think she's much more she's great at pointing out what the other side is doing wrong, even what her own side is doing wrong. So that's great in debates. But yeah, I don't know. I think for me personally, we're too far off for me to pick a candidate which will be good against JD Vance. To be honest, every candidate is good at when it comes to against JD Vance. But I think JD Vance is not right. He won't be running as just JD Vance. He will be running as this, again, as a person inheriting the Trump doctrine and being kind of anointed maybe by Trump to some extent. And the last thing I want to mention is that we have mentioned briefly the third term thing. So it's kind of like when I look at the Republican side of things, like there is this chaos factor for me that I take into account, that like I just don't know whether, JD Vance will be, in terms of like just mental health, in shape to run for president. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I just wanted to
yeah.
I wanted to add a little bit to the analysis on AOC. The best thing I ever heard about her prospects is that she has something that's either going to be the greatest political gift or the greatest political burden, is that she would be one of the only politicians that already has 100% name ID before she runs for president. Everybody
Mhm.
knows who she is, and everybody's likely made their minds up about her way before she ever runs for president, which could really help her because a lot of running in a primary is just getting people to know who you are, but it could also hurt her because people are likely to already be a bit more polarized around her than they would otherwise be. More Perfect Union just did a really good video with Bernie Sanders where he drove through rural West Virginia, and he talked to a lot of people there who had never heard him speak, but that had only heard about him. They were very deep Trump voters, and he connected with them on a one-on-one level with a lot of them and got them to sort of understand his message and actually support him. I don't know if that's something that I could see AOC doing in the same way. Right.
Yeah, I totally see the fact that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump would appeal to similar people, right? It's this sort of populist message that I think resonates with a lot of people. Yeah, in all honesty, trying to be objective here, looking at it, if AOC really was in a general election with the JD Vance, I would really find it hard for her to win, to be honest. Just I don't know if you guys agree with me or not agree with me. If you could quickly, because we're getting close to the end.
As far as the thing about JD is JD genuinely really surprised me in that debate with Tim Walz. Like, Tim Walz is someone who I considered a really, really strong politician, who I thought was a much better politician than Kamala Harris, genuinely. And he got his butt kicked in that debate. Like, that was not even close. JD like wiped the floor with him in a way that I genuinely didn't expect. And I think that's kind of when I woke up a little bit and was like, oh my God, this guy is right, like the chameleon factor that we talked about earlier.
So Stan, really quickly, if you were to say, would you think really that AOC has would have a good chance of beating him?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, or maybe not. I'm not so confident when it comes to AOC, but again, I am very confident that she is a politician that has something to offer. I think that there is currently a shortage of those, especially when it comes to the Democratic side. And I think JD Vance, I think being a political chameleon to some extent is an advantage, but you can also present that as a massive disadvantage, right? So if you present JD Vance as someone who essentially just did nothing for 4 years, carried out Trump's orders, and was just a right-winger, even though there is so much about him and his beliefs that maybe don't agree with everything that he said or did, I think I would risk the thesis, but we would have to see. I'd risk the thesis that AOC just has more policy points than JD Vance. She just wants more things than JD Vance that are kind of original and that we haven't seen in quite some time in American politics. But I think it would be massively to the disadvantage of AOC if she decided to, move towards the center in her campaign, because I think I don't know how a campaign like that would play out well for the Democrats, and I'm afraid that the Democrats are looking for something like that, right? To go to the center, which is safe, which is the Kamala Harris pitfall, and they might fall into it again. And yeah, but we'll see.
Thank you. Okay, so it's not often that I obviously get someone who lives in Florida on this channel, so I want to shoot 2 quick questions at the end towards your way. So firstly, who will be the new governor? Will it be DeSantis's wife or Byron Donalds?
I think it'll be Byron Donalds.
Byron Donalds. And secondly, if you could, in a sentence or 2 sentences, now this is going to be difficult, summarize why Florida turned so red over the last 8 years.
Oh my God, 1 or 2 sentences. 2 words: in migration. In migration.
Which?
I think in migration. I think
okay.
People, there has been a lot of conservative influx into this state from other parts of the country. You can see that in the price of property. You could see that as someone who's lived here almost my whole life. The face of the state changed a lot as of 2020. It did sort of become a Republican safe haven, even in terms of like media jobs, right? Like I graduated from college 2 years ago, and I was looking for jobs in like politics and punditry and all these things, and everything around me was One American News Network, was Daily Wire, right? All the job openings nearby. I actually One American News tried to get me for a job interview. Like they tried to recruit me, and I was like, oh, sorry, like I can't. Not One American News.
Either that or being a producer for Ben Shapiro's show.
Yeah. It was, and when I tell you, it's all like a right-wing media here. Just the face of the state really did change. Lots of people coming in from Texas, California, New York, New Jersey, and I have a couple videos about Florida specifically that delves into that in more detail if anyone's interested.
Brilliant. And I mean, that's a perfect plug, because I was about to plug your channel. So anybody who watches my channel in Poland and is very interested in American politics and can follow, can watch an English video without a problem, please go to Andrzej Dutra TV, I believe. No, Andrzej Dutra, but Andrzej Dutra, yeah. And check him out. Obviously, so Stan, thank you so much for coming. Stan from Politics Now.
Thank you for having me.
And again, thank you so much, Andrzej, for making the time.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you very much.